The Bread of the Bay, a story of John Tefft. The salt air hung thick over the marshlands of Portsmouth in 1655. It was a biting November morning, and the tide had pulled back to reveal the mudflats, a glistening expanse that held the colony's most reliable treasure. John Tefft, a freeman of the town, adjusted the weight of a hand-woven basket on his shoulder. He didn't mind the cold water seeping into his leather boots. The corn harvest had been thin, but the Sakonnet River was always generous. By the early 1660s, the call of the South became too strong to ignore. John moved Mary and the children, Samuel, Joshua, Tabitha, and Mary, to the sprawling lands of South Kingstown. As they settled into the Pettaquamscut area, the landscape changed, but the rhythm of the seasons remained the same. The wild oysters here were even larger, untouched by the growing crowds of Portsmouth. In the shallow reaches of the narrow river, John found reefs that had grown undisturbed for decades. Each clack of a shell hitting his basket was the sound of security for a family carving a life out of the wilderness. John wasn't just feeding his family, he was building a monument. As he began construction on his stone ender house, the oysters served a dual purpose. While the meat simmered in Mary's iron pot, the shells were hauled to a makeshift kiln. John watched the fire consume the shells, reducing them to the white lime needed for mortar. As he laid the massive fieldstones for the great chimney, the heart of the Tefft home, he knew that the very bones of the sea were now the bones of his house. The mortar that held his family's shelter against the winter gales was a mosaic of the thousands of oysters that had kept them fed. Inside the rising timber frame, the air smelled of wood smoke and sea salt. Mary worked with practiced ease. There was no luxury here, no lemons or fine vinegar, just the honest taste of the Atlantic. She simmered the oysters with salt pork and cornmeal, creating a thick, briny porridge that warmed the children to their bones. As they sat by the massive stone fireplace, John looked at his sons. He saw a future built on this land, rooted in the fertile soil and the endless bounty of the ponds. For John Tefft, the oyster was the silent partner in his success. It was the poor man's protein that provided the strength to clear the forests, and the very glue that held the stones of his legacy together. In the quiet of the South Kingstown woods, the family ate in gratitude, knowing that as long as the tide went out, they would never truly go hungry. Mary sat by the crackling fire and began to write. She entitled her poem, The Bread of the Bay.
Upon the shores of Portsmouth's gray-misted tide, where the Sakonnet's cold fingers reach out wide, John Tefft walked the flats where the eelgrass sways. In the quiet light of those early, hungry days, with a woven basket and a salt-chapped hand, he gathered the silver-gray fruit of the sand. No delicacy then, no rich man's prize, but the bread of the bay under iron skies. When the corn was thin and the winter was deep, the bounty of the river was a promise to keep. The clack of the shells in the morning chill was the sound of a belly that would have its fill. Then south to Pettaquamscut, through the forest green, to a wider world that the Teffts hadn't seen, where the narrow river winds its brackish way, and the oysters grew thicker in the salt pond spray. There, John cleared the oak and he held the fieldstone to build a great hearth for a life of his own. He burned the white shells in a kiln's hot breath to conquer the cold and the shadow of death. From the meat came the strength for the timber and beam. From the lime came the mortar for a pioneer's dream. The massive stone ender, with its chimney so high, was held by the seashells beneath the dark sky. So here's to the man and the harvest he bore, from the Portsmouth mud to the Kingstown shore, a legacy built on a humble, briny shell, in the land where the Teffts and the Narragansett dwell. The taste of the ocean, the strength of the stone, the story of a family that made this land home.